Welcome again to another Freedom Pages Presents with Mr. Kilroy. Today, a brief history of gun control in Canada. We live in the day and age of the ruling elite. Those would be all of our professional classes, politicians, who are of the belief that the Firearms Act is for our own good. It's dressed up in the language of public safety. Matter of fact, it's the Minister of Public Safety that administers it. And sold to the public as the only way to keep the streets safe. I suppose if you were to ask any Canadian, they would say they support gun control. And I would bet you would get a different concept of what that means from each of them, which will be rooted in their personal fears and prejudices. However, as I read the following paper prepared by the Research Department at the Canadian Institute for Legislative Action, the CILA, you will discover that this is nothing new, nor is it original. In fact, in years gone by, gun control in Canada was completely driven by racism. But when all is said and done, it really comes down to politician safety. It's the means to keep the ruling elite safe. Purportedly, Jean Chrétien's main motivation for his wanting stricter gun control was his fear of how many Canadians were armed. According to the National Firearms Association's estimates, it was approximately 7 million firearm owners in control of 21 million firearms. I find it funny that the streets weren't running red with blood, as many of the gun control advocates would have you believe. I've lived in Canada all of my life. I'm 50 years of age today, and it's only been in the past, I would say 15 years that guns have been absolutely abhorred and feared in this country. You used to be able to go into Canadian Tire, believe it or not, Simpsons and Sears back in the day, and you could buy yourself a nice shotgun rifle for hunting attire, ammunition, no bother. Simpsons and Sears, no less. I guess that would be just Sears today. Okay, on to a brief history of gun control in Canada, 1867 to 1945, by Alan Smithies, Research Director at the CILA. Bill 68's enormous cost overruns continued to generate intense controversy over the rationale and efficacy of Canada's firearm controls. But conflict in Canada over regulating firearms is nothing new. It has occurred many times since Confederation. In the first of two articles, I will provide a brief history of the federal government's efforts to regulate the ownership and use of firearms, and to outline the context in which these regulatory actions took place. European settlers to North America would have viewed firearms as essential for providing food and necessary both for personal protection and the common defense. The modern idea that private gun ownership constitutes an unacceptable threat to public safety would have been viewed as a little bizarre by our 18th and 19th century ancestors. In fact, up until the late 20th century, private gun ownership was generally regarded as essential to defend Canada against external aggression, and to protect the citizen against domestic tyranny. While the right to bear arms is now usually regarded as a peculiar American obsession, its English origins are frequently overlooked, and in fact it is entirely overlooked. Incorporated in England's 1689 Bill of Rights, the rights of citizens to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state is described by Sir William Blackstone in his famous 1765 Commentaries on the Laws of England. As one of the fundamental liberties of an Englishman, no doubt most early British settlers in Canada shared this view. With neither a standing army nor a modern police service, both personal and national security relied on civilian gun ownership. Now, I'm going to editorialize right here. The problem is, today, we do not conceptualize our army and police forces as basically agents of the government. We like to believe that the Canadian Army is, they're just like us, good Canadian people. But in fact, one of the reasons for the right for the citizen to be armed in the Bill of Rights of 1689 was because the King kept a standing army. Well, oddly enough, Canada has a standing army. Okay, to continue. But it is internal security issues that will eventually drive most of Canada's firearm laws. Social and political conflict has played a fundamental but largely unacknowledged role in the development of Canada's gun laws. Again, no kidding. It's always been for the public good. We have to keep the streets safe. We don't want guns falling into the wrong hands. All of the language of public safety. Like the United States, England, Australia, and New Zealand, most of Canada's firearms legislation appeared during periods of turmoil, motivated by perceived threats to the political and economic status quo, and combined with an exaggerated fear of crime and disorder from Aboriginals, ethnic minorities, labor activists, and the unemployed. Firearm control in Canada has always been used more for citizen control than crime control. Gun laws accompany every major political upheaval or crisis in Canada. As we peel away the layers of legislation, it becomes abundantly clear that the history of Canadian gun control is the story and perhaps the future of the country itself. Glued together by the British North America Act, a document described by a Canadian historian, Greg Marquis, as one of the least inspired constitutions of the 19th century. I have to agree with that. It's as dull as dishwater. The Confederated Provinces of Canada, Ontario and Quebec, those were described as Upper and Lower Canada at one time, New Brunswick, another colony, and Nova Scotia, are governed by a political structure that secures the economic interests of the business classes, ensuring that Great Britain, merchants, and industrialists dominate the colony. Even today, a majority government in Canada's House of Commons is in effect a clique of ruling senior level civil service mandarins and cabinet ministers who value the facts of power, the fact of power as the appearance of power. Assisting them is a rigorous code of strict party discipline, combined with carefully rationed patronage, virtually assures that all government legislation is approved. With a power base favoring the political interests of Ontario and Quebec, the structure of Canadian government continues to protect Eastern Canada's political and financial elite, ensuring that the Liberals and Conservative parties dominate Canadian politics. Peace, order, and good government thus becomes synonymous with the political and economic status quo, And as time and circumstances progress, gun control plays its own unique role in maintaining this relationship. Just 6 months after Confederation, the renewed threat of Fenian-led invasion from the United States prompts the federal government to pass legislation on 21st of December 1867 prohibiting the unlawful training of persons to the use of arms. This legislation, originally introduced during the 1837 rebellions in Upper and Lower Canada, is applied almost exclusively against Irish Canadians. Anti-Irish and especially anti-Irish Catholic sentiment is especially pronounced during this period of Canada's history, many of whom are unjustly considered sympathetic to the Fenian cause. Now, who are the Fenians? Well, for those a little short on the historical landscape of Canada, the Fenians were actually what you could call the proto-Irish Republican Army. They wanted the English out of Ireland, basically, no differently than the IRA has wanted in our modern time. In April of 1877, Liberal Justice Minister Edward Blake tells Parliament that the practice of carrying firearms is becoming too common. Sound like somebody? They were carried by two classes who ought not to carry them: the rowdy and reckless characters and boys and young men. His government responds by introducing legislation recognizing the defense of self, family, or property as the only legitimate reason for carrying a pistol or air gun upon the person. Funny, today that one is completely removed from our Firearms Act. If you say it's for personal defense, they'll swoop down on you so fast, they'll clean out your closet, you clean out your gun safe, everything removed from it. Or just plain deny you the license. The parliamentary debate over Blake's legislation has a remarkable resemblance to firearm control arguments heard 100 years later. MPs viewed the world as divided into criminals whose access to handguns needed to be prohibited, and the law-abiding whose right to carry guns for self-protection should not be restricted. This dichotomy continues to frame discussion on gun control issues. Back then, even Sir John A. Macdonald criticized the proposed legislation as having the effect of disarming the persons who ought to be armed and arming the rowdies. Gee, that's exactly what's happened today with Bill C-68. It's disarmed people that were of no threat to anybody, and pretty much if you are affiliated into the street culture and gang culture, you pretty much can get any firearm you want. It's purported that a member of the Hells Angel, when he was arrested, had pages of the firearms registry, in particular those of prohibited firearms. Those would be all of the automatics. But it is important to remember that this legislation did not outlaw the carrying of firearms upon the person, which was evidently quite widespread, but merely specified that carrying a pistol or air guns pardon, in a manner that would upset the public could result in possible jail terms, unless that person could prove that he or she carried a pistol or air gun because they had reasonable cause to fear an assault to self, family, or property. Well, I'll draw this to a close right now and carry on the carry on in part 2 of a brief history of gun control in Canada.